When my stepmother moved in, she took my room for her daughter and said, "You can sleep on the floor. You're used to being a nobody." When I asked my dad why he allowed it, he said, "She's right. Her child deserves more than you ever did." When my stepsister needed college fees, they sold my car to pay for her. When I asked for help with rent, they said, "Stop expecting charity. Nobody wants to invest in a failure." When I got a promotion, they claimed, "Probably pity from your boss." At family gatherings, they introduced me as our burden child, but posted, "So proud of our brilliant daughter." Only my stepsister's photos. When I brought home my fiancé, they mocked him. "He's blind to be with you." I smiled and said, "At least he sees me for who I am." A year later, I made a decision that made them cry in court. "Please, don't do this to us." When my dad remarried, I thought maybe, finally, things would get easier. I was 22, freshly out of college, barely holding together a part-time job while trying to figure out how to pay my own rent. I didn't expect much from my dad. He'd always been distant, but I assumed he'd at least let me keep the tiny space I'd grown up in, the one corner of the house that felt like mine. I was wrong. The first time my stepmother, Dana, set foot in the house, she didn't even greet me. She marched straight to my room, measuring walls and windows like she was auditioning for a design show. I remember standing in the doorway, clutching a small box of my things I'd dragged from my old apartment, trying to say something polite. "You can sleep on the floor," she said without looking at me. "You're used to being a nobody." At first, I laughed nervously, thinking maybe it was a bad joke. But when I saw the smug satisfaction on her face and the way my dad just nodded without a word, I realized this was the new normal. I asked him later, when we were alone in the kitchen, why he let her do that. He shrugged, poured himself a glass of water, and said, almost casually, "She's right. Her child deserves more than you ever did." Her child. My new stepsister, Lily, was 13, perfect, and terrifyingly spoiled. Dana made sure every inch of the room I'd grown up in was redecorated for Lily. Fluffy pastel bedding, a vanity with lighted mirrors, shelves stacked with art supplies I wasn't allowed to touch. And me? A thin mattress on the floor of the living room, tucked into the corner like I wasn't even supposed to exist. At first, I tried to argue. "This is my room. I've lived here my whole life." Dana just laughed. "That doesn't make it yours anymore. Life's not fair, sweetie. Maybe this will teach you to stop expecting things." I stopped arguing after that. My dad didn't defend me once, and I realized that the fight wasn't worth it. It wasn't about furniture or square footage. It was about sending me a clear message. I didn't matter. It didn't stop there. A year later, when Lily decided she wanted to go to a private college 2 states away, Dana and my dad had no problem selling my car to fund her tuition. My car. The first real thing I'd ever owned in my life. When I confronted them, voice shaking, Dad said, "You can get by without it. Lily deserves this. You've never had it easy, have you?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to hit something. But instead, I swallowed the rage, nodded, and went to work on the bus. Every mile a reminder that my own family didn't care if I got anywhere. Even small asks became impossible. When I fell behind on rent one month, I called my dad and Dana, hoping for a loan or even a little help. Dana snorted and said, "Stop expecting charity. Nobody wants to invest in a failure." Dad just sighed and said, "She's right. You need to stand on your own, like everyone else." The thing is, I had been standing on my own. Barely. But to them, nothing I did was ever enough. Promotions at work were probably pity from your boss. Saving up enough for a modest apartment? You'll never make it. My accomplishments were invisible unless they could twist them into mockery. Family gatherings were the worst. They made sure to introduce me to everyone as our burden child, a phrase I'll never forget. Meanwhile, every social media post they made celebrated Lily. "So proud of our brilliant daughter." Every smiley photo, every caption about success and talent. It wasn't my life, it was hers, and I was just an unfortunate background character. The humiliation wasn't just for show, it was personal. The first time I brought my fiancé, Alex, to dinner, Dana couldn't hide her smirk. She whispered loudly enough for me to hear, "He's blind to be with you." Dad didn't correct her. I caught Alex's eye across the table. He looked like he wanted to vanish. But I smiled and said, loud enough for them to hear, "At least he sees me for who I am." It wasn't defiance, not really. It was survival. I had learned to carry my pride quietly, to keep my dignity even as they tried to strip it away. Every insult, every theft of my things, every casual humiliation only hardened something in me. I began documenting everything: receipts, text messages, photos. I started thinking about what it would mean to fight back in a way they couldn't spin into a story of my failure. By the time the year was up, I was tired. I was exhausted from feeling invisible, from watching the people who were supposed to love me treat me like a disposable inconvenience. But somewhere under all that exhaustion, a plan started to take shape. I didn't just want revenge. I wanted recognition. I wanted them to feel the weight of every word, every dismissal, every betrayal. And I knew, deep down, that the first step wasn't confrontation. It was waiting, watching, and preparing, because no one had ever underestimated me like this and gotten away with it. By the second year after Dana and Lily moved in, the house felt smaller than ever. Not physically, but emotionally. Every corner carried their judgment. I had taken to leaving early in the morning and coming back late at night just to avoid being trapped in that constant scrutiny. Even the air seemed heavier when they were around, like it had been filtered through their disdain. I'd started working more hours at my job, picking up extra shifts and freelance gigs to save for an apartment of my own. It wasn't easy. Every day felt like walking through a gauntlet, but I convinced myself that if I could just get out, I could breathe again. What I didn't realize at first was that getting out would require more than money. It would require strategy. Every interaction with Dana and Lily reinforced the idea that I was invisible. Dinner conversations were performative. "Did you hear about Lily's art exhibit?" Dana would announce. "She sold 3 paintings already. Such a prodigy." I nodded and smiled politely, knowing that if I opened my mouth, the words would be twisted into proof of my inadequacy. My own achievements were quietly erased. One evening, my supervisor called me into his office. I had just finished a high-pressure project that was months in the making, and I was nervous, unsure how it had been received. He looked at me, not with pity, not with a passing nod, but with respect. "This is the kind of initiative we need more of," he said. "We're promoting you to lead the next project." I wanted to shout in excitement, but the first person I thought of telling was my dad. And then I remembered the last time I shared any good news. Dana's smirk, Dad's muttered, "Probably pity from your boss." I swallowed the urge to gloat. Instead, I went home quietly, keeping my victory to myself. That night, I overheard them planning another family surprise for Lily. My dad was on the phone, arranging a scholarship opportunity and extra tutoring hours. Dana bragged about how she and Dad had sacrificed to make sure Lily had every advantage. I sat on the couch, my stomach twisting. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to demand acknowledgement. But I didn't. I had learned that impulsive anger in this house only became ammunition for them. So I waited. I focused on saving every cent I could, keeping a record of every interaction, every insult, every stolen opportunity. I kept meticulous notes: dates, times, what was said, and who was present. It felt almost obsessive, but the obsession was protective. Every insult, every dismissal, was a brick in the foundation of the case I was quietly building in my mind. Lily's birthday came, and with it, the usual display of favoritism. Dana had transformed the living room into a pastel dreamscape. Friends and relatives oohed and awed, and there I was, perched on the floor with a thin blanket, smiling through the humiliation as they paraded Lily's brilliance in my face. It stung, but I told myself, not for long, not forever. Then came the financial crisis that cemented my understanding of how deep their bias ran. I called Dad one night, voice tight with exhaustion, explaining that my rent was overdue and I needed help. The line went quiet for a long moment before Dana's voice cut in, sharp and unwavering. "You're an adult. Stop expecting charity. Nobody wants to invest in a failure." Dad's voice followed, softer, but no less hurtful. "She's right. You've always struggled. Maybe this will teach you to manage your life." I hung up, heart pounding. I'd expected the argument, but the casual cruelty still cut through me like glass. For the first time, I realized I couldn't rely on them for anything. My family wasn't just indifferent. They were actively invested in making me feel small, expendable, inadequate. It was around this time that I began sharing small victories with Alex instead. He listened. He celebrated. Unlike my family, he didn't diminish my achievements or frame them as charity or luck. With him, I could finally feel some semblance of pride. We started talking about moving in together, saving, and planning a future that didn't include being gaslit by people who were supposed to love me. But even as I built that life outside, the house remained a battlefield. At every family gathering, Dana would loudly compare me to Lily. Maybe if you tried harder, you'd be half as accomplished as your stepsister. Guests would look uncomfortable, and I'd nod politely, hiding the hurt, knowing that any outburst would just feed their narrative. Every slight, every insult, every theft of my possessions became a lesson in patience. I realized that rage alone wouldn't fix anything. I needed leverage. I needed a way to reclaim what was mine, and more. I started researching legal avenues, documenting everything meticulously. Every text, email, and incident went into digital folders. I became almost surgical, planning my moves carefully. By the end of that year, something had shifted. I wasn't the scared, invisible girl sleeping on the floor anymore. I was strategic. I was patient. And I was quietly, meticulously preparing for the moment when all the injustice, all the humiliation, and all the stolen opportunities could be transformed into proof. Proof that I wasn't a failure. Proof that their favoritism wasn't harmless. And proof that I deserved recognition, respect, and compensation. I realized, for the first time, that I had a weapon they couldn't see. It wasn't money, it wasn't power, and it wasn't physical strength. It was the truth, fully documented, fully undeniable, and ready to be revealed. And I knew, in the quiet hours of the night, when Dana and Lily slept and Dad was distracted by work or TV, that the day I chose to act would be the day they finally understood. Underestimating me had been their biggest mistake. By the time I hit 24, I had started to see the patterns clearly. Dana and Dad weren't just cruel, they were predictable. Every insult, every manipulation, every stolen opportunity followed the same rhythm, like a badly written script I'd been forced to memorize. And if it was predictable, I could anticipate it, counter it, and eventually turn it against them. The first step was financial independence. I had saved enough from overtime, side gigs, and Alex's encouragement to put a deposit down on a small apartment. It wasn't glamorous, a one-bedroom on the third floor with a creaky elevator, but it was mine. Moving out felt like shedding a layer of poison. I packed up my meager belongings in the dead of night to avoid confrontation. Dana, of course, had made no effort to hide her contempt when she realized I was leaving. "Good riddance," she called out, smiling sweetly, as if she'd won. Dad just shrugged. "You'll figure out the real world soon enough," he said. I didn't argue. I smiled and waved goodbye. Inside, I felt lighter than I had in years. But leaving didn't mean forgetting. I had learned one crucial thing. This family thrived on my absence being a humiliation, so I would give them nothing, not even the satisfaction of seeing me stumble. Once I was settled, I started implementing the strategy one had been quietly building for years. I cataloged every incident: the room they'd stolen, the car they'd sold, the tuition they'd paid for Lily while denying me assistance, the relentless verbal abuse. I collected screenshots, emails, receipts, witness statements from relatives who had noticed the favoritism, and even notes I'd made at the time. My filing system was meticulous. Every insult became evidence. Every dismissal became a documented act of neglect. At work, I doubled down. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. Projects that had once felt intimidating became opportunities to prove myself. I got another promotion, this time to a managerial role that came with significant bonuses. I also began networking strategically, connecting with legal advisors who specialized in family law and financial disputes. I wasn't acting impulsively. I was building a foundation for the day I would finally confront the family, and I wanted it to be airtight. Meanwhile, Dana's and Dad's favoritism of Lily escalated. She had started college, and they were posting endless pictures on social media, praising her achievements, while I was still the failure who couldn't be counted on. Every post was a reminder of how invisible I had been treated, but it also became ammunition. Publicly, they were claiming generosity and pride. Privately, they had treated me like a disposable burden. I began documenting the discrepancies, capturing screenshots and noting dates, creating a digital paper trail that could not be ignored. Alex became my rock through all of this. He reminded me that the cruelty of my family was not a reflection of my worth. He helped me stay calm, methodical, and patient. I realized that anger alone wouldn't win this. I needed precision. I couldn't just lash out. I needed a strategy that combined evidence, timing, and legal leverage. One weekend, my dad called, pretending to be concerned. "I hear you're doing well," he said. "But don't forget, family is important. Lily is struggling a bit at college. You might want to help her out." I paused before replying. "I remember when you sold my car to pay for her tuition. Are you suggesting I do the same for her now?" There was silence on the other end. Then Dana's voice piped up, thin and sharp. "Don't be ridiculous. You're not responsible for Lily." Exactly. That was the line I had been waiting for. Their hypocrisy was undeniable, and I had it all documented. I decided it was time to involve a lawyer for a consultation. I wanted to understand my rights, financially, legally, and in terms of inheritance, since Dad's estate could be challenged due to favoritism and negligence. The lawyer explained options I hadn't considered: claims for financial exploitation, documentation of emotional abuse, and even potential claims regarding how they had prioritized Lily's education and expenses over mine. Every piece of evidence I had meticulously gathered suddenly had a practical, actionable use. With a clear plan in place, I started small, testing their reactions. I requested a simple financial clarification about my trust fund, something that had always been promised but never fully disclosed. Dana laughed, Dad rolled his eyes, and they dismissed my request casually, thinking I hadn't learned my place. I smiled inwardly. Each dismissal, each patronizing comment, only reinforced my case. They were proving their own bias and neglect. At family events, I began attending with quiet confidence. Dana and Dad still tried to humiliate me in front of relatives, calling me our burdened child or making offhand comments about my accomplishments being luck. But I didn't react. I stayed calm, polite, and unflinching. It was frustrating for them. They were used to breaking me with words, and now, their words bounced off a shield of strategy and restraint. Even Lily noticed. She started asking me questions about work, life, and independence. For the first time, she saw me not as a background character in her mother's script, but as a competent, independent adult. I didn't tell her everything, but I let small pieces of reality filter through. That was enough. By the end of the year, I had assembled everything: documentation, financial records, witness accounts, legal guidance. I knew that when the time came, I could present an airtight case, one that would expose the favoritism, the abuse, and the blatant neglect. Every insult, every humiliation, every stolen opportunity had been recorded, stored, and transformed into power. For the first time in my life, I felt in control. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was ready to confront them on my own terms. The waiting had been excruciating, the planning meticulous, but I knew the day I acted would be the day they finally understood the magnitude of what they had done and the cost of underestimating me. And so I waited, calm, patient, confident. Every time Dana smirked, every time Dad dismissed me, every time Lily flaunted a success I had been denied, I reminded myself, all of it would be turned against them. Not out of vengeance alone, but for justice. And I knew, deep down, that justice was coming, and they had no idea how close it already was. The first confrontation wasn't dramatic. It didn't involve shouting or doors slamming. It was subtle, precise, and devastating in the way I had planned. I had spent months compiling every shred of evidence, every slight, every financial injustice. When I finally felt ready, I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer to review the documents I had meticulously gathered. I wanted everything airtight, so that when the moment came, there would be no room for argument, no opportunity for Dana or Dad to twist reality in their favor. The weekend I chose to tell them was ironically calm. Dana had invited relatives over for one of her infamous family brunches to celebrate Lily's latest academic award. I arrived early, dressed professionally, confident in a way they hadn't seen before. The instant they saw me, I could feel the tension ripple through the room. They were used to the scared, compliant version of me, and this was someone else entirely, someone composed, capable, and unafraid. Dana tried to greet me with that same fake warmth. "Oh, look at you. All grown up," she said, her tone dripping with insincerity. Dad, as usual, nodded vaguely. "Hope you're doing okay." I smiled politely, waiting for the perfect moment. The family settled around the table, Lily chattering excitedly about her award. That's when I spoke. Calmly, without raising my voice, I said, "Actually, I'd like to talk about something serious before we start brunch. Heads turned. Dana's expression flickered. Dad's brows furrowed. Lily stopped mid-sentence. About what? Dana asked, attempting casual dismissal. About the way I've been treated over the years, I said. About the favoritism, the insults, the financial decisions, and the verbal abuse. I have everything documented: dates, messages, receipts, witnesses, and I've consulted a lawyer to understand my options. For a moment, the room went silent. Dana's lips tightened. Dad looked like he'd just swallowed something bitter. Lily's eyes widened, a mixture of confusion and apprehension. I continued, steady, controlled. When you sold my car for Lily's tuition, refused to help me with rent, called me a failure, and publicly humiliated me at gatherings, all of it was recorded. Every insult, every denial, every manipulation. I have a complete record. Dana tried to interrupt, but I raised a hand. Please, let me finish. I want to make it clear. I'm not here to fight, but I am here to assert my rights. I have been treated as disposable, invisible, and inferior for too long. I want to rectify that. Dad's voice finally broke through, shaky but defensive. You're exaggerating. We've always helped you. I cut him off, calm but firm. Exaggerating? Selling my car without my consent, forcing me onto the floor while Lily got my room, denying me financial assistance while funding her education. It's all documented. I'm presenting the facts, not my feelings. This isn't about anger. It's about accountability. Dana's smugness faltered. You can't be serious, she said. I am, I said. And because of the careful documentation I've kept, I have legal options. We can resolve this privately, or it can go to court. Either way, the outcome will be based on fact, not favoritism or manipulation. For the first time, I saw Dad hesitate. He opened his mouth, closed it, then swallowed hard. I had caught him off guard. They were used to me backing down, used to me cowering, and suddenly, that was gone. My calm, meticulous presentation was more effective than any outburst could have been. Lily, younger but perceptive, finally spoke. Wait, all this time, you were documenting everything? Her voice trembled, not with anger, but with disbelief. I nodded. Yes, every insult, every slight, every denial of support. It's all here. I tapped the binder I had brought with me, neatly organized and labeled. I didn't do this for revenge. I did this because I had to protect myself and assert my worth. And because I'm finally done being treated as a burden. Dana's face turned pale. You wouldn't dare? She started. I already did, I said. And the truth is undeniable. I've done nothing wrong. You, however, have a long record of neglect, favoritism, and emotional abuse. I want to give you a chance to make amends before we escalate this legally. But if you continue to dismiss me, there are consequences, both financial and legal. The silence that followed was deafening. Dana looked like she wanted to argue, but she couldn't find the words. Dad was pale, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Lily simply stared at me, a mixture of awe and shame washing over her young face. I continued, slowly, deliberately. I'm moving forward with my life, and I want this family to acknowledge me as an adult, not a disposable child. That includes respect, financial fairness, and public acknowledgement of my accomplishments. I am no longer invisible. I am no longer a burden. And I won't allow myself to be treated that way ever again. Dana's smugness was gone, replaced by fear. Dad's posture slumped, and for the first time, he didn't have a ready excuse. Lily's eyes softened. I could tell she was starting to see the reality I had been forced to navigate alone. It wasn't vindictive. It wasn't cruel. It was justice. And for the first time in years, I felt a sense of power that had nothing to do with anger. It was rooted in truth, preparation, and self-respect. By the end of that brunch, Dana and Dad were quiet, subdued. They didn't apologize, at least not out loud, but their smiles were forced, their conversation clipped. I had planted a seed of awareness they couldn't ignore. And for the first time, I realized that being underestimated for so long had given me the upper hand. The binder sat on the table between us, silent and authoritative, a symbol of every insult, every stolen opportunity, every dismissal that had been ignored for years. They didn't need to hear more, they understood. And in that understanding, the first cracks in their armor began to form. I left that weekend feeling lighter, but also steely. The next steps would be legal, unavoidable, and definitive. But for now, I had done something almost as satisfying. I had made them realize, without raising my voice, that I was no longer powerless. The court date felt surreal. For years, I had carried the humiliation, the stolen opportunities, the constant reminders that I was less than in my own home. But now, I walked into the courthouse with the quiet confidence of someone who had prepared every detail, documented every slight, and built an unassailable case. Dana and Dad were there, dressed in their usual air of superiority, but even from the back of the courtroom, I could see the tension in their posture. They had no idea how thoroughly I had prepared. My lawyer guided me through the process, reviewing the evidence one last time. Every email, receipt, photo, and witness statement was laid out clearly, logically, and concisely. I felt a strange mix of nerves and satisfaction. For the first time, the world was watching me as I deserved to be watched, not as the failure, not as the invisible child, but as a competent, formidable adult who would no longer be silenced or dismissed. The hearing began. Dana's lawyer tried to frame the story as minor disagreements, exaggerations of a young adult's insecurities. Dad sat stiffly, occasionally glancing at me, trying to read the expression on my face, probably searching for the scared girl he had known for years. But the evidence spoke for itself. When my lawyer presented the binder, carefully detailing every instance of favoritism, neglect, and abuse, Dana's smugness evaporated. Dad's calm demeanor cracked. Witness after witness, family members, neighbors, even co-workers who had seen the toll of their behavior, testified to the pattern of abuse and inequality. Every lie, every justification, every public act of favoritism was meticulously countered by factual evidence. At one point, Dana attempted to interject, trying to paint me as vengeful, emotional, and overreacting. My lawyer didn't flinch. "We're presenting documented facts," she said. "This is not about emotion, it's about accountability. Every financial decision, every act of humiliation, and every instance of preferential treatment is documented and verifiable." Dad's face was pale. I could see the realization dawning. This was no longer a private argument at the dinner table, no longer a dismissive shrug or a condescending remark. This was reality, laid bare for everyone to see, and they couldn't spin it. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the stand calmly. I looked at Dana, at Dad, and even at Lily, who was sitting silently, unsure what to make of it all. "For years," I said, my voice steady, "I was told I was a failure, a burden, and that I didn't deserve the same support or respect as Lily. I was humiliated publicly and privately. My car was sold without consent. My room was taken. My requests for help were mocked or ignored. And yet, every achievement, every milestone, was dismissed as luck or pity. This is not the way anyone should be treated, least of all by their family." I paused, letting the weight of the words settle. Dana looked like she might faint. Dad's hand trembled slightly on the edge of the podium. I continued, "I have spent years documenting every instance of neglect, abuse, and favoritism. I have tried to survive, to stay polite, to maintain my dignity. Today, I am asking this court to acknowledge the truth, not for revenge, but for justice, to ensure that what was taken from me is recognized and that no one else has to endure the same treatment in this family." The judge listened intently, flipping through the binder and examining the exhibits. Dana and Dad's lawyers faltered under the sheer weight of evidence. Every excuse, every minimization, every claim of innocence was systematically dismantled. I didn't have to shout. I didn't have to cry. The facts did all the work for me. After hours of testimony, legal arguments, and presentation of evidence, the judge finally leaned back. "This case demonstrates a clear pattern of favoritism, neglect, and emotional abuse," he said. "The plaintiff has provided overwhelming documentation and testimony. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff in matters of financial restitution, acknowledgement of prior abuses, and entitlement to independent assets that were previously withheld or mismanaged by the defendants." Dana gasped audibly. Dad's face was ashen. Lily's eyes were wide, and for the first time, she looked at me not as an overshadowed step-sibling, but as someone who had been strong, patient, and relentless. I felt a wave of relief, satisfaction, and empowerment all at once. Every insult, every humiliation, Every stolen opportunity had been transformed into undeniable proof of my worth and resilience. I had won, not just legally, but emotionally. I had reclaimed my life and dignity on my own terms. As we left the courthouse, Dana tried to speak, her voice wavering. Please, we can work something out. Don't do this to us. I smiled softly, calm and composed. I've done what needed to be done. You treated me as if I didn't matter for years. Today, the court has recognized that I do. Dad tried to mutter something else, but I didn't respond. I walked away with Alex by my side, the weight of years of mistreatment finally lifting from my shoulders. Lily followed quietly, a little humbled, perhaps finally understanding the person I had been all along. On the drive home, I felt a profound sense of closure. The family that had made me feel invisible, unworthy, and small could no longer wield power over me. I was free, financially, emotionally, and psychologically. And in that freedom, I found a strange peace. Not revenge, exactly, but validation and justice, the kind that comes from truth, patience, and courage. For the first time, I could envision a life where my worth was recognized, where my achievements were celebrated, and where I could exist without fear of ridicule or dismissal. And as Alex took my hand, squeezing it gently, I knew that I had not just won a case. I had won my life. The family might have cried in court, begged for mercy, tried to spin their narrative, but it was too late. I had turned every slight, every insult, and every act of favoritism into proof of my resilience and my worth. And that was a victory no one could ever take away.